Today we're talking to Edward Jones Chief Market Strategist Alan Skranka about a rare investment policy committee change in one of its recommendations. Alan, first explain how the committee's advice has changed.
Ruth, the Investment Policy Committee has reduced its recommended weighting for aggressive income in half. Previously, the committee suggested a range of 0 to 10% was an appropriate weighting for most investors. Given current market conditions, we believe investors should have no more than 5% of their overall portfolio in aggressive income. So if you're overweighted, talk to your financial advisor about how to rebalance your portfolio and reduce your aggressive income exposure. Aggressive income investments, often called high yield, junk, or non-investment grade bonds, are by their very nature high risk. The committee is concerned because investors are not being adequately compensated for the large risks in the junk bond market today. We believe today, given the very low rates being offered on junk bonds relative to other bonds, they're especially risky. And this includes the mutual funds that own a large percentage of junk bonds.
Alan, explain why junk bonds are a risky investment.
Ruth, I like to say there's a reason they call it junk. The following chart shows the average cumulative default rate for junk bonds relative to investment grade bonds over the past 25 years. The two primary goals of an investor in fixed income are usually income and safety relative to stocks. As you can see, there's a much greater risk of losing your income and your principal by owning junk bonds.
But don't investors typically receive a higher rate of income for shouldering that extra risk of default?
Well, historically, that's been the case. Over the past 10 years, junk or non-investment grade bonds have offered on average rates that are 4.7 percentage points higher than a 10-year government bond, which carries less risk. But today, that difference in rates, commonly called a yield spread, is about 2.5%, or about half its historical average. So junk bond investors are taking on just as much risk, and maybe even more today, for about half the yield spread.
But some junk bond portfolio managers will counter this argument by saying, my portfolio is well diversified.
Well, diversification can reduce the impact if one individual bond defaults. However, it won't help much if you own a diversified mix of junk bonds and the entire asset class experiences problems. Usually in this area, when it rains, it pours, which means you'll start to see them default in larger numbers regardless of the industry they're in. This usually happens during a broad economic downturn because that's when lending standards tighten up and companies with weak balance sheets often have difficulty staying afloat. Bankers seem to sense the cycle is coming to an end, but the competition to stay in the game limits their ability to pull back. In fact, the CEO of Bank of America, Ken Lewis, recently said, "We're close to a time when we'll look back and say we did some stupid things." In other words, bad loans are made in good times. We believe many junk bonds will default when the economy enters the next recession.
What if you already own these bonds?
Well, our advice is to limit the amount of aggressive income you own to no more than 5% of your portfolio. If you purchased a bond that was originally investment grade, but the rating has dropped to non-investment grade, sell it unless you're willing to accept the high risk associated with owning a junk bond. Most people, however, are exposed to junk bonds through a mutual fund they own. Review those investments carefully to see how much is invested in junk bonds. One of Edward Jones' 10 rules of the road is don't reach for yield. We believe that advice is especially important today.